Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Football Actuary Podcast. I am your host, Brock Talby, the Fantasy Football Actuary. So, as returning listeners know, the first segment on Saturday episodes is generally the Thursday night throwback. However, there was no Thursday night game this week. Much to the surprise of a couple of my league mates, they did not realize that the schedule was shifting yet again because the Bills and Titans ended up playing on Tuesday. The Bills and Chiefs game that was scheduled for Thursday night football got pushed to Monday. So there is another doubleheader on Monday night, and all of the games this week, barring any COVID pushbacks, will be played on Sunday and Monday. So there's no Thursday night throwback. So instead, we will jump right into the NFL newsstand. So let's get the weekly COVID news out of the way first. The Patriots had another positive test result on Friday, but the league has told the Broncos to plan on playing the normal scheduled time as of now. So right now we have no idea who the positive test was. We don't know if it was a player or a personnel or a coach, and we don't know how many people that person was around. So right now there's not a need to panic. Positive results have meant mixed things so far this season. The Titans had the outbreak. The Falcons had a personnel test positive this week with no real issues. And then the Colts had multiple false positives show up yesterday. So regarding the Patriots, we'll just have to wait and play the Patriots game by ear. We won't probably know until later today or maybe even tomorrow. If positives show up on Sunday morning, that might be an issue. We should know if it's going to be pushed back later today. So if you have any players in that game, either the Patriots or the Broncos, you'll just want to pay attention and make sure you're staying up to date. Don't just set your lineup. Hopefully it's not just set and you're not planning on logging in until after the games kick off tomorrow. Just make sure you're keeping up with the news on that. Beyond COVID, the big news easily this week is that LeVeon Bell has signed with the Chiefs. He signed with the Chiefs on Thursday after being released from the Jets on Tuesday. Yes, Adam Gase cut Le'Veon Bell, and Bell went to the Super Bowl favorites to crush Clyde Edwards-Helaire owners' hearts. So this isn't a huge surprise that Le'Veon Bell isn't on the Jets anymore. Adam Gase and Le'Veon Bell butted heads a lot. It was widespread information that Adam Gase did not want to sign Le'Veon Bell. It was not his decision. He was not Gase's player. And Gase even said this week that it's irrelevant that people think that he didn't use Bell correctly. So it's not a surprise that they weren't happy with each other and that he's no longer on the Jets. It's a surprise that they cut him 5 weeks into the season. They still owe him money. And now he's on a contender. And this just crushes Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It really does. Earlier in the week, myself and a lot of fantasy analysts on Twitter were of the belief that Helaire was a great buy low candidate. I even offered up a trade in my 10-team league of Antonio Gibson and Mark Andrews for Clyde and Noah Fant. The guy turned me down, and it appears that I really dodged a bullet on that one because, in my opinion, Helaire becomes a flex play, and Bell is probably the same. They both have running back 2 upside, but Bell probably has a little more with his touchdown potential. But he doesn't begin practicing until next week. So you have Helaire for one more week. He hasn't been super good because he hasn't gotten in the end zone. So you can play him as normal this week, but next week you'll want to definitely adjust expectations, and he's not a locked and loaded start anymore once Bell starts practicing. So Le'Veon Bell owners are probably happy. Clyde Edwards-Helaire owners are obviously disappointed. Once Bell got cut, you knew he was going to go somewhere and kind of ruin the fantasy situation for another running back group. Apparently, other people thought the Chiefs were a very possible landing spot. When I first heard it, I thought it was the least likely one. And then it became the Vegas betting odds favorite. So again, like I said, I'm just glad that my league mate turned down my trade and I'm not stuck with Helaire. and dealing with the Le'Veon Bell signing. So moving on, Christian McCaffrey reportedly could be out until week 8 or through week 8 rather. So Mike Davis owners keep starting him and enjoy the ride possibly all the way up until the Panthers week 9 bye. So the Panthers might want to play it safe with McCaffrey, keep him out through week 8. They have a bye in week 9 and then he could make a return in week 10. Not what you want to hear as a McCaffrey owner, not what you want to hear after investing the first overall pick in most fantasy leagues. But anybody who picked up Mike Davis is grinning ear to ear and is thrilled with how Mike Davis has been doing. Melvin Gordon, he got arrested on a DUI charge on Tuesday night, but it does not appear that the Broncos intend to suspend him or even punish him with missed game time or anything like that. He is, however, battling a non-COVID illness and is questionable for Sunday's game. So he has to be symptom-free today, from what I understand, before he is allowed to travel with the team. So if he's not symptom-free, he won't be traveling today, and then he won't be playing in the game tomorrow. So at least you'll have a good amount of time to get your lineup situated based on if he is playing or not playing. And it doesn't appear that the DUI is going to affect that. It is just the illness. So the next piece of the news is the injury update. Darius Slayton is questionable for the Giants after that big week he had last week. Owners will be hoping that he is active. They are playing Washington. So it's a game of two defenses that have been getting destroyed lately. Slayton was really good last week. He went for over 100 yards. I believe he had a potential touchdown called back on a penalty. So he could have had an even bigger game. If you're counting on Darius Slayton, you're hoping that he plays. Dalvin Cook is out for the week, which was expected, and this is why Alexander Mattison was a very high waiver priority, and he is a great play this week. My models really like Alexander Mattison as an easy top 10 play across all formats. Both Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham are questionable for the Browns this coming week. Landry is dealing with a hip and rib injury, and Beckham is dealing with an illness. It is a non-COVID illness similar to Melvin Gordon. He was sent home from practice this week, and he's questionable for the game on Sunday. DJ Chark is also questionable. I'm personally pivoting away from Chark in my Dynasty League. I got hosed. I missed out on his very big week based on his target volume the first couple weeks, and then coming off the injury, I didn't play him. He had a huge game. I put him back in my lineup last week. He gets injured. He only has a few targets even before the injury. He was pretty irrelevant. Chenault was leading the wide receivers in targets. So even if Chark is active, I'm probably pivoting away from him in my Dynasty League. And I'm going to start the new hotness, Chase Claypool, instead of DJ Chark, even if he is active. And I was probably already going to do this anyways, but it just made it a smash play with the news that Deontay Johnson was ruled out. So yesterday, Deontay Johnson was ruled out for Sunday's game. I don't know. Tomlin acted like his back injury wasn't that big of a deal, and then he wasn't practicing this week, and at least he was ruled out. As of now, Deontay Johnson is in my IR spot in my 10-team ESPN league, but next week I have a couple buys to deal with. So I'm probably going to drop Deontay Johnson. I probably wasn't going to play him anyways, either way, especially this week. As a fantasy manager, you tend to hold grudges against players that screw you over. And Deontay Johnson, you screwed me over twice with two first quarter injuries, and I couldn't stomach playing you either way. With this, I think Chase Claypool is just going to establish himself even more. I think it's going to be tough sledding when you come back, so you will find yourself on my waiver wire come next week. Noah Fant is, quote, truly questionable, according to Broncos head coach Vic Fangio. So with Fant, it sounded really positive last week. It sounded like his injury was going to keep him out of week 5, but he should be back for week 6. Luckily for him anyways, the Patriots-Broncos game got pushed a week, so week 5 became their bye, so it looked like Fant could miss 0 games, just skipped the bye in week 5. Um, but it appears that when it came down to it, his recovery must have been slower than what the Broncos were hoping for. I'd have a contingency plan in place for Fant, like I do in my Superflex League. So, speaking of tight end contingency plans, Mo Alley Cox is out, which makes Trey Burton a very interesting play against a bad Cincinnati defense. And Burton is going to be my play should Fant not suit up. I don't expect him, he's on waivers right now. I don't expect him to get picked up at all before Sunday. I don't think anyone's really looking at Trey Burton, but he's gotten a lot of targets the last 2 weeks. And with Mo Alley Cox out, and with the Cincinnati defense being a good matchup, I think that Trey Burton is a decent play for anyone dealing with injuries like me as a Noah Fant owner or anybody else who is desperate for a tight end play. I think you could do worse than Trey Burton, and he's going to be my play should Fant miss. Jordan Akins is dealing with an ankle injury. He cleared concussion protocol, I believe, which is what kept him out last week. He is a tight end for the Texans, but now he has an ankle injury. So Darren Fells is definitely in play still for the Texans this coming week. I ended up playing Fells as a bye week fill-in for TJ Hawkinson last week in my Dynasty League, and it worked out. Fells had 2 catches, just 2 catches, but he had 52 yards and a touchdown. So if Akins misses, I think Fells is still a decent play. He tends to find the end zone. Usually he falls in the end zone. I think his touchdown catch was his long catch last week, so it was like a 40-yard touchdown. Whatever works, usually he just falls in the end zone on like 3-yard touchdown plays. Jimmy Garoppolo is the starter this week for San Francisco, but I am definitely not playing him anywhere after what we saw last week. So Jimmy Garoppolo was terrible. He got benched probably just to avoid a setback in a lost game. The Dolphins came out and kind of smothered the 49ers. They just took the life right out of them. And by halftime, that game was over. So it makes sense to sit Jimmy Garoppolo in that instance when he is coming back off of injury. But he avoided a setback, according to Shanahan, and he is slated to start this week. But I am not starting him. I'm pretty sure I have him ranked as my last quarterback play on the week. So my models really do not like Jimmy Garoppolo this week. Devontae Adams and Julio Jones are both entering the week without injury designation. So they're both playing. I feel good about Adams. He's had time to recover. He acted like he was ready to go before their bye last week, and he was held out by team personnel and doctors. So I assume that he is good to go. I assume that he is fully healthy. I am more nervous about Julio, but he's probably going to be in your lineup if you have him. Unless you have 2 absolute monster receivers to play instead of Julio, I think he's probably going to be in. But you're going to be nervous, and watching him leave early again would suck. Zach Moss practiced fully this week, and he appears to be back, which really limits the upside for Singletary once again. I had flexed Singletary a couple times in my 10-team standard league. I'm probably not doing that until I see what the split looks like with Moss back in the lineup. Singletary looked pretty good until this past week against the Titans. I know Kansas City is a decent matchup for running backs. They're giving up pretty good yards per carry to running backs. So it's not like it's a bad matchup, but with Moss coming back, I'm not flexing Singletary. I'm actually playing Laviska Shenault in my flex instead of Singletary this week, and I'm just going to wait and watch what happens in the Bills' backfield with both of them back and healthy. Stephon Gilmore is back off the COVID list along with Cam Newton. So if the Patriots end up playing, Gilmore will be covering Jerry Jeudy, which makes him a significantly worse play than if Gilmore was still out. And finally, Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson are both out this week after getting in limited practices. Travis Fulgham is still relevant this week, at just one more week at least. If Alshon and Deshaun both come back, I'm probably not going to play him. But with both of them being out, he's still relevant this week. So we will get into our next Saturday segment, Fringe Player Frenzy. So if you're new to the podcast, this is where I go through a quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, and I talk about some fringe players that you might have picked up on waivers or you might have drafted later. Some guys that you might not start every week, but why I think you should start them this week and hopefully give you the confidence to play them over some other fringe player options. So we'll get into the quarterback first. My fringe player is Ryan Fitzpatrick. So my first note here is he's playing the Jets. Yep, it's the Jets. If that isn't enough to sway you, Fitzmagic has been a top 12 quarterback for the last 4 weeks, and he's been a top 10 guy since the middle of last season. He has a solid rushing base and isn't afraid to chuck it downfield. Combine that with the great matchup, and my models are projecting a top 5 finish from a guy who's widely available in single QB leagues still. So you could pick him up off the waiver wire and have a potential top 5 quarterback on the week. I'm starting Fitzpatrick over Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, and Deshaun Watson this week. Whether you have the balls to do that is your own choice, but my models are projecting him to finish over those guys, and he's looked good, so I would strongly consider it. Again, if you're not brave enough to do that, I totally understand. My fringe player running back is David Montgomery. Montgomery was super inefficient last week. He had an abysmal 2.9 yards per carry, a terrible looking 4.3 yards per catch, and it's these kind of numbers that I was afraid of when I benched him in my Dynasty League for Antonio Gibson last week. However, Montgomery came through with a touchdown and the volume you want to see from your starting running back. He had 8 targets and 7 catches, along with 77% of the rushing attempts for the Bears. So with Tariq Cohen out, Montgomery is a volume play. And while it might not be efficient like last week, he's probably going to get it done most weeks thanks to the opportunity. This week, however, that volume gets combined with the Panthers' defensive matchup. So Montgomery should be a stud. As I've mentioned a couple times on the podcast, the Panthers are the worst rushing defense in the league. They were the worst last year. They're the worst again this year. So Montgomery should be way more efficient than last week. Combine that with the opportunity, and I'm playing Montgomery over Raheem Mostert, Ronald Jones, and Jonathan Taylor this week. My fringe player wide receiver is Jamison Crowder. On a per game basis, Crowder is the wide receiver 2 on the season, which is insane to believe. He's only played in 3 games due to injury, but he's been over 100 yards in all 3 of those, and he's caught touchdowns in 2 of them. That'll get it done. That will get you to wide receiver 2 on the season. He's a fantastic start and the only real offensive weapon the Jets have after cutting LeVeon Bell. Darnold's going to throw to him early and often, and Crowder should be a good play against the Dolphins again, and his volume should keep him comfortably in that high wide receiver 2 range at worst. I'm starting Crowder over Odell Beckham, Cooper Kupp, and Mike Evans this week. It's not going to look pretty. You're going to look at your lineup and you're going to be thinking, I'm starting Crowder over Odell Beckham, over Cooper Kupp. But, I mean, all 3 games this season, he's been over 100 yards and he's caught touchdowns in 2 of them. No Le'Veon Bell. Who else are the Jets going to use? The Dolphins aren't a particularly scary team to go up against. So yes, I am playing Crowder over those guys. And finally, my fringe play tight end is Eric Ebron. So I know this didn't pan out last week. I mentioned him as a decent option to pick up if you needed a tight end to play with injuries, buys, or COVID happening, but he ended up letting you down ultimately. The good news is that he had 5 catches last week, and he's averaging 6 targets per game. If you take out that bad fumble last week, he gives a good tight end floor, especially in PPR formats. He shouldn't goose you. Like I said, he's averaging 6 targets, so if he gets you 5 catches and 40 to 50 yards, that's a good floor in any kind of PPR format for tight ends. He's not getting you 0 points. And couple that with a decent chance at finding the end zone, and he's a solid play. I really do believe that. Cleveland, who the Pittsburgh Steelers are facing this week, has allowed the 6th most fantasy points to tight ends this year. So my models are fairly high on Ebron's chances of delivering a top 10 week. I'm starting Ebron over Mike Gesicki, Jimmy Graham, and TJ Hawkinson this week. So to recap, my fringe player frenzy starts are QB Ryan Fitzpatrick, running back David Montgomery, wide receiver Jamison Crowder, and tight end Eric Ebron. So I know I only covered a couple of players there. If you want to check out the website, you can see my full week 6 projections. And just a note, when you're going to the website, I have a modeled score. That is not a projected point total. So if you're comparing players, don't think that this player is projected to score zero point 0.5 points more than this other player. Those are model scores. So my model is giving me a numerical score, and that is how I am ranking the players. It is a statistical model. It is not projecting points. But you can go to my website and check out all of the week 6 projections. I have all formats and I have flex rankings. This is all for free. The website is thefantasyfootballactuary.com. If you want to check out a video version of this podcast and any future podcasts, you can go to my YouTube channel, which is The Fantasy Football Actuary. And if you want to follow me on social media, my Twitter and Instagram handle are at The FF Actuary. So that will wrap up this Saturday edition of the Fantasy Football Actuary podcast. I hope you have a fantastic week. Enjoy the Sunday games and the Monday night doubleheader. Hopefully you do well in your weeks, and I will see you back here on the Tuesday episode. Until then, keep crunching those numbers.